Good morning, everyone. Today is April 11th. Oh my goodness, only 4 days away from tax day. I think we have until Monday to turn in our taxes. I still have to work on those bad boys. Not super excited about that. I'm sure none of you out there are excited either. What you should be excited about is our daily wake up rundown, which I'm bringing to you live from Fairfax, Virginia. Well, we actually are live right now. By the time anyone watches this, probably won't be live, but regardless, I have some really interesting things to talk about today. Last night I spent most of my evening, thankfully, I was glad to have the opportunity to watch the VODs for the CLG versus TSM finals for IPL 4. And the games kind of went as I expected. The first couple of games, well, actually, I was kind of surprised to see the second game wasn't really like a poke comp by CLG. They just kind of, outplayed and, you know, split pushed, which has kind of been CLG's strategy forever. Now, I say it's been CLG's strategy forever, but that is not entirely accurate. It has been HSGG's strategy forever, and CLG for the longest time was like, okay, we're going to farm better than the opposing team. We are going to then somehow get into a better position for a team fight. We're going to be super patient. We are just going to wait and wait and wait, and they will eventually slip, and we will have an advantage in a team fight. So that's been their strategy forever, going back for as long as I can remember. And we didn't really see any divergence from this in recent tournaments until the GG Classic. So in Hanover, for example, they didn't really run. I mean, they've been running split push strategies, but it was mainly, wait and group up for a team fight. The split push strategy was just so they could actually make the other team mess up because they'd have Hotshot GG go bottom, generally with teleport, so we could teleport into a Baron fight and have the advantage there. Now, it really backfired on them against teams like M5, who apparently, had a good counter to this, split push strategy, which often revolved around Nocturne or Ashe, people who could hard initiate, make sure no one got away. And that being said, it did work. There are counters to the split pushing strategy. Certainly those, semi-global or global ults are some of them, although we also saw CLG, use the split push strategy against TF, for example, to pretty good success. Shen or Hotshot GG was playing Shen and would always get away. I was just like, oh my goodness, he's never going to land a gold card on that guy. But in the GG Classic, we saw, CLG was playing from Korea. They had like 200 ping, but what they pulled out was APCOG and Nidalee top, also AP Nidalee, and they just pushed down towers. They had Caitlyn, I think Janna bottom, so like a lot of, counter-initiating, a lot of, CC with the Caitlyn traps, so on and so forth. So they could just push towers, and it was a complete push strat. And it's weird that we didn't see this too much before from CLG, because we know that Hotshot's favorite champion forever has been Nidalee. What I think kind of kicked it off was actually in Hanover, against All Authority, ran a split push strategy with Nidalee against CLG and won their first game. And then the next game, I think CLG actually had to ban out Nidalee, and then they came back and they won their, the final 2 games against All Authority. So I don't know if that was kind of the impetus being like, oh, we actually don't have a good counter for this besides just banning out the champions. And no one actually seemed to have a really good counter until they banned out Nidalee. I think they banned out Janna too, because Janna and the ability to, counter-initiate, to disengage fights is so important for that split push strategy or that poke strategy, because you actually don't want, fights that come to a head, because your damage is more over time, is more poke related, especially with Nidalee. Her spears are really strong, but insofar as a team fight, she's not really all that useful. But the whole kind of lesson to take out of this was it took CLG almost 2 years to find a way to use Nidalee in tournament play. And, Nidalee's actually received nerfs over that course of period of time, so she probably would have been better in the past. But it just came to like kind of CLG strategy. They used to really just want to force a team fight all the time, and Nidalee's not a great team fighter insofar as regular team fights that last 10 seconds, because she gets 2 spears off, she goes into Cougar form and jumps on people, she dies pretty instantaneously. So there is that, and I think, CLG finally realized how to harness the power of Nidalee. For the longest time, Nidalee hasn't even been banned against Hotshot because he hasn't been running him too much in tournaments. But now, of course, that is going to change because anytime they get that Nidalee, I think they'll feel like, okay, well, let's run that push strat. It really works. There's very few counters to it. We've kind of perfected it, and we're, really, really good at, not fighting these team fights that we don't want to. So I think that's kind of an interesting concept. It took CLG so long to really play towards Hotshot's strengths, and maybe TSM could have done the same. And I mean, TSM could have done the same with Rain Man. Of course, he picked Teemo, who was a really kind of a split-pushing champion, but they never really perfected that strategy, never wanted him to play Teemo. But it's so weird because, obviously a Hotshot kind of is a creator of CLG, so it's not so much that, they could make him change, but, all top laners, when they're recruited for a team, or just basically all top laners, kind of specialize in a couple of champions. Dyrus would be Jackson Singed. Rain Man was, of course, Teemo, and I think he played Singed quite a bit as well. Hotshot was Nidalee, Cho'Gath. And those are his, two strong ones. I feel like if he's on anyone else, he kind of is suboptimal. And even on Cho'Gath, Cho'Gath is great, but doesn't really work with the split push strategy, and that was kind of the issue when he got caught a couple times in Hanover. Cho'Gath doesn't run away, as good as Shen, as good as Nidalee. I mean, he doesn't really run away. All he does is tank a lot, but once people get into their endgame builds, that he can die relatively fast anyway. So I mean, he has one champion that really works with this kind of strategy, and it is his main champion. And a lot of top laners have their favorite go-to champions. Now, as we see new teams come along, like Zion Spartan, Voyboy for Dignitas, Zion Spartan's the Monomaniac, they seem very diverse. Fortnite, Dr. Trevor seems very diverse in his champions. But at the same time, I'm sure they all kind of lean towards one champion that is their main champion that they really want to go to all the time. So I think it's a pretty good idea to try to work around your top laners. What do you really like doing? We'll try to make a team around that. But to do that, you really have to have a diverse AP carry. Like for example, Big Fat LP didn't really have in his repertoire champions that were great at poking. Good poke champions for AP middle would probably be Gragas, and now of course AP Kog'Maw, maybe Xerath, and I think Big Fat probably plays a pretty good Xerath, but I don't ever really see him play Gragas. I'm sure he's fine at it because he's awesome at everything in the game, but I don't really see him play those other champions. And now he's picked up AP Kog'Maw, so he actually has the opportunity to kind of go into that poke composition team and make it really successful. So that's kind of what I took from those games. It looks like, Nidalee's going to have to be a ban again against Hotshot. Like, for a while, people were like, oh, don't have to ban him. Now it's going to be back on the boat. Have to ban Nidalee. And it wasn't only just Hotshot playing Nidalee really well. Zion Spartan played Nidalee really well. I'm not sure if anyone else picked him up, but Nidalee had was only appeared in 5 games, got banned out in a couple of games, appeared in 5 and won 4 of them. So, whereas this champion who couldn't really fit into a tournament role 2 years ago, is now turned around, is winning most of their games. It's always been banned just because certain players like Hotshot, like Soaz, all specialize in her. But even though they specialized in her, even though they were, arguably or inarguably the best Nidalee players in the world, she wasn't seen as a viable tournament pick, and people would let them have her. Oh, because in tournaments we just team fight, and she's not great in team fights. Well, now we see kind of a counter strategy to that, and we'll see how that kind of evolves in the future. We saw 2 really interesting strategies, that being the poke strategy and the protect the hyper carry, who was Kog'Maw in this tournament, with the Dignitas running 3 supports essentially. So those 2 things I thought were interesting. Another thing that I'm going to touch on today is Zeke's Herald for my rundown wake up, because I saw some high elo players rushing it, notably Mistake LOLs. Let's look at their match history. So in these games weren't rushing it, but Wajana rushing Zeke's Herald. Now, apparently Gosu Pepper frequently rushes Zeke's Herald too, and I like the idea, I like the concept, just because I feel like Zeke's Herald and Aegis are the go-to items, and I actually like the build order for Mistake LOLs, 1 GB5 and then 1 aura item. I think that's kind of the ideal way to do it, because you generally, games don't really last that long. Games kind of end right after you get your 1 aura item. If you buy 2 GP10 items, sometimes you don't even get your aura item, which is, detrimental to team fights. The one thing about this, though, is you essentially give about 500 gold worth of, or no, actually 1,000 gold, 500 gold worth of attack speed, and about 500 gold worth of lifesteal to your allies, which, comes out to be about 1,000 gold. But the one thing is, no one ever thinks of lifesteal as a defensive stat. But it is. It is completely a defensive stat. It doesn't help you do more damage to people. It helps you survive longer, so you can do more damage. But it doesn't actually help you do more damage to people. And, Zeke's is great because it gives 15% cooldown reduction and some life. But we look at the total cost, 2145. Now, we're going to go over to my favorite item in the game, Aegis of the Legion. Now, I've done the numbers before, and it essentially adds up to about 750 gold worth of, defensive stats, or worth of stats towards towards anyone on your team that's within 1,200 range. The difference with Aegis of the Legion, though, is it also is giving you, significantly more defensive presence. And now I understand picking up Zeke's if your jungler rushes an Aegis, but, I wouldn't always pick up Zeke's in that case either, because what happens is junglers tend to be bruisers who go into the front or into the back lines of the opposition. Your main job as a support is to protect your carry, so you're always within, or should always be within, 1,200 range of your carry. Now, your bruiser in teamfights is often going to be, further removed than that, so they're actually not giving your AD carry those bonuses. That also being said, I feel like Aegis is a better, more well-rounded item. You get to build more defense. You don't have those wasted stats from Zeke's Herald of the attack speed and the lifesteal, because you don't need that, obviously, as a support carry, or as a support champion. A support carry. That'll be a new term. Support carry. So, I still like Aegis a little bit better. I still would find that probably in 80% of the cases I would buy it over Zeke's, but I think Zeke's is a nice second item to rush. And that being said, if you have a hyper carry, if you do have like a defensive jungler who is intending on staying kind of grouped in with the pack, maybe a Malachi for instance who rushes that Aegis, then I can see rushing that Zeke's Herald, because then you're giving that AD carry 1,700 gold worth of free items, and that's kind of your goal, is to give as much free gold to other people on your team as possible as a support, while still being able to do your job. And the one thing I guess that the Zeke's Herald has over the Aegis is that cooldown reduction, which is essential for a support champion. But that being said, Aegis actually allows you to survive better. And I always feel like, if people focus me, unless they're like incredibly fed, they're kind of making a mistake, because they just waste a lot of burst on, I'm not very survivable, but with my Aegis, I'm, surprisingly tanky, especially as like a Janna or someone, and I'll probably survive long enough. And with Janna, you don't have to, get hit anymore in a team fight. You can stand, 800 range behind your carry, and you'll still be able to shield them. Your tornadoes will still land, so on and so forth. So I feel like Aegis is still the go-to item, but I certainly understand why people may rush Zeke's. It's certainly a good item, and I suspect people will play it more, or will use it more and more. Certainly the other thing I do like is one GP10 item into the Aura item, but I'll talk about that more probably on a separate Wake Up Rundown day. So that is all for us for April 11th. Of course, I'm going to be streaming solo queue coming right up. We'll jump into queue here, and that is that. We'll be back for another Wake Up Rundown tomorrow morning.